I think that the most important skill I can teach my daughter is to be able to withhold attention for more than 5 seconds. Because this is how news, real social media, everything is being done in these 5 seconds TikTok-like bites of information.
Benjamin Svergaard, neurologist at Aalborg University Hospital.
There is a lot of literature about the social media as a dopamine machine, which fosters a brain that cannot concentrate for more than 5 seconds and will lose interest if they are not rewarded with a dopamine release in the first 5 or 10 seconds of starting something. So that means that if you want to pick up a new skill, say play the violin, that is going to get harder because the brains of the next generation are trained to lose interest in anything that they don't succeed with or are being immediately entertained with.
Just try and master one thing. Because once you have gone through that process of mastering something, then you get an experience of the work that is required to achieve that level of performance. And then you start to see more differences between what is quality work, what is quality effort, what type of focus is needed to actually reach an actual goal. So it makes them more respectful of other people's accomplishments, but it also teaches them that there is a process to obtaining that goal.
Bonded by Science, proudly presented by NobleBlocks.
Hello everyone, I am joined today by Benjamin Svejgaard, who works in brain-computer interface mediated stroke rehabilitation, and he has spent the last few years as a board member at the Center for Neurotechnology and Rehabilitation at Aalborg University Hospital in northern Denmark. He is currently the project lead at the BCI Star study, which we talk about in the podcast, where he investigates the effects of brain-computer interface on upper limb rehabilitation following stroke. Now, this is super, super relevant for those that are interested in brain-computer interfacing and rehabilitation science moving forward. We go over what is the current status of that technology. And the reason why it's such an interesting conversation is that Dr. Svejgaard is in fact a medical doctor. He is pursuing his PhD. He is a neurotechnologist and a keynote speaker, and he gives several lectures on brain evolution, technology, and neuroscience to the general public, but also at conferences related to neurology and neurosurgery. So tune in and listen to how our conversation unfolded.
I had this thought yesterday that, your kids, Shade, and I don't remember the name of the other one.
Ashton, yeah.
Ashton, yeah. Shade and Ashton, they grew up in a world where artificial intelligence wasn't rampant, at least not in the beginning.
Not in the beginning.
My daughter she will never form memories of a world where you don't have to doubt everything because it might be a deep fake. She will never be able to believe what she sees on screen. That's weird.
Oh yeah, I never really imagined how that will play out on someone's psyche, or will we be even more skeptical, or will we just be ants following a trail that some other ant left us? So
yeah, I think a little bit of both. We talked about this last time we saw each other, that there might be some kind of A and B team of humans with a sense of skepticism and ability to read a book, and then humans that cannot do that. So kind of, I think we're not genetically diverging into several sub classifications, but I think we're getting there. I think that the most important skill I can teach my daughter is to be able to withhold attention for more than 5 seconds, because this is how news, real social media, everything is being done in these 5 seconds TikTok-like bites of information, and the news outlets, they are going there too, and you can see it in serials running. On a recommendation from my sister, I just started watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and the pace there is, don't laugh, it's good.
Okay, no, I you saw my face.
There is, yeah, I saw your face. It's so slow compared to some of the new serials I'm watching with my wife these days. And I think that this acceleration of information and acceleration of dopamine inducing stuff that goes on a screen, that is something that we will see more. It's not just me sitting around thinking about this. There is a lot of literature about the social media as a dopamine machine, which fosters a brain that cannot concentrate for more than 5 seconds and will lose interest if they are not rewarded with a dopamine release in the first 5 or 10 seconds of starting something. So that means that if you want to pick up a new skill, say play the violin, that is going to get harder because the brains of the next generation are trained to lose interest in anything that they don't succeed with or are being immediately entertained with. And that is my hot take on social media.
I 100% agree. I think quite a few years ago, I read a book called Deep Work. The name of the author has slipped my mind. It's really just one of the most important skills that we have is the ability to perform deep work. And as you're mentioning here, that is the first thing that it seems that our, the dopamine rewarding machines that we're building and being glued to at all times is the one that it's robbing us of. But not just us, as we're in the middle of our careers, or some people haven't even started theirs, and so you wonder, like, what is it that they're going to be able to do? And you kind of worry for the productivity of the world in some way. What will we produce? But I think the attention span is a huge problem. Especially when you couple it with some of the new technology that is being deployed now, where people won't even so even if you use some of the large language models, what you're saying now is that you wouldn't even have the possibility to properly edit or vet it. You would just accept it because it's a task that lasts longer than 5 or 10 seconds. So you wouldn't have the attention span to vet that content.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting direction that the human mind is, the human brain is taking, because every time we admire anyone for doing anything, what is really going on is that we're admiring the effort they put into learning this skill. I'm a musician, as you know, and I see a lot of really, really good musicians performing in various pubs and scenes and wherever they go play. I went to see this Irish dance show a few months back, and at that point it hit me that the reason we pay upwards of 400 kroner to see this show is because we want to revel in the talent and the dedication of these very talented performers. And it's the same effect that goes on with everything else. Whenever we admire someone, it's typically because we admire the time they put into doing what they do, whether it's a bodybuilder or a podcast host or somebody who is extremely talented at giving presentations. What we admire is their ability to put focused effort into something to a point where they are really good at doing it. And this ability to do deep work, that is waning quickly.
I am concerned also. I think one of the things that we have talked about in our family, like for our kids, is just try and master one thing. Like, find the one thing and master that, because once you have gone through that process of mastering something, then you get an experience of the work that is required to achieve that level of performance. So then you start to see more differences between what is quality work, what is quality effort, what type of focus is needed to actually reach an actual goal. So it makes them, more respectful of other people's accomplishments, but it also teaches them that there is a process to obtaining that goal. And so they don't, you don't want your kids to run around, feel like victims through their lives because they haven't been able to achieve anything that's important to them. So that's something that we've discussed, and it's usually what I give, like my first advice that I give to people that are much younger than myself is to master something.
Yeah, master one thing. Yeah.
Learn what it is to master one thing. It doesn't matter. It could be a completely useless skill, but just master it and just like see how much time and effort.
Yeah, I agree. It's the same cognitive processes that you need for playing an instrument are the same diligence or vigilance or whatever you want to call it is what you need to master a new language or writing a book or becoming really good at sorting beetles based on their color or whatever. You will need all your skills and the whole acquiring a skill, mastering something, the whole process is what drives you to be able to master the next thing. When I studied medicine, we had this big anatomy test, and it was like, I don't know the English word for it, but in Danish it's called a stopprøve, a stop test. So they will stop the ones that won't cut it anyway. And this was in the first year, and I think they stopped around 20% of us, 15-20% were either failed in this test and had to redo it the semester after, or simply just dropped out of the medical curriculum. And it was a hard test. I remember I at some point I changed my sleep habits, so I slept 2 hours at a time with a few hours between them for studying, so I could study throughout the night and still get my REM sleep in. I mean, at one time I had to go to sleep on my floor because I knew if I slept in my bed, I wouldn't be able to get out of it and study.
That's discipline. Like to purposely not choose to be uncomfortable. You chose to be uncomfortable. And I think that is also a life lesson. Like there's your like super comfy bed with your pillow that you probably take traveling with you if you could. And you chose to sleep on the floor. That's the first time I've heard like entrepreneurs, and you hear these stories about how people really dedicate themselves to a goal and they sleep on the office floor, or and you always think it's some strange or it's something you admire, but I mean you're doing it just to get through like the first screening year of med school is to sleep on your floor.
Yeah, but what I was driving at is that after this test, medicine became way easier. And I think that part of it was because it was the stop test and they had to sort us out with a very hard test. But it became easier because at that time, even though I haven't used my fine anatomy since that, I used the skills I learned in cramming huge amounts of information into my brain. So a lot of what we had to do in the anatomy curriculum was learn how to study, learn how to sit your buttocks down and get your nose in the book, and then absorb all the information there. And I think the rest of the curriculum got easier because I elevated my own studying skills, and maybe because it was easier. I mean, physiology and biochemistry, it was a breeze compared to anatomy, and I never had to do the sleep on the floor thing again.
It could be that you did elevate your studying skills. That's one way to interpret the situation. The other one would have been to say, well, they do the screening because your line of work requires it's a lot of dedication to go through med school, and depending on what track, I don't know if you knew what track you were going to take at that point, maybe not, but depending, on what direction you head in, I mean, you could be called at 3 a.m. in the morning. So they need to know that people are willing to be disciplined. So maybe it was really, the test is rooted in discipline, dedication, commitment.
Yeah, exactly. It's a discipline curriculum disguised as an anatomy test.
Tough. Which is why, when was it, like last year or 6 months ago? I can't remember now. Time seems to fly so fast.
Yeah, it does.
Where they had that. They announced that was it OpenAI that passed the medical bar?
The medical bar, yeah. I think it was in the fall.
It was not that long ago. It was not that long ago, but it passed. And I think what people forgot to realize was that it's definitely like, first of all, it's knowledge that you can just look up. Like, it's all indexed, right? So a lot of it is very indexed. And what you have just described here was the skills that you acquired as an individual in preparation to pass is really the skill that was needed. It wasn't just to regurgitate fine anatomy. That was not the test.
That is my belief, but no one has ever confirmed that for me. But I
no, they will not write it out, right? But it's
no,
part of the
probably not.
process. Yeah.
If I could just get hold of one of them and then get it verbally, I would be happy. But I think there is a reason that the hardest, most feared test is the first one, because the skills you acquire will make everything easier. It's like instruments. The first 5 or 6 ones are the hardest, or languages for that matter. I mean, I'm at my 3rd language right now, and I still think it's pretty hard. But once I get to my 5th or 6th one, I think it'll be a breeze.
You mentioned that part of the test is to cram a bunch of knowledge into your brain. And given your area of research and your professional background, do you see in the future that we're going to have other ways to cram a bunch of knowledge into our brain? So now if we get into a little bit of shop talk.
It's the science fiction dream. It's the Matrix, the scene where Keanu Reeves, he learns Kung Fu in like 10 seconds. And I'm having a hard time seeing how we could get there. Because right now, the brain-computer interfaces that are out there right now in patients, they are small chips like a centimeter in diameter or something like that. And they are going into the motor cortex, because that is a part of the brain we have most conscious control over. And to be able to cram scientific knowledge or mastery of an instrument or a martial art into the basal ganglia, where it's probably there the Kung Fu and instruments are going. I don't see that happening, because the brain is still hugely complex, and we don't really know how memories are formed. We don't really know where consciousness resides, and we do know where these motor patterns that are required to perform feats of skill and dexterity. We do know sort of where they reside. They're in the basal ganglia, but we don't know how to code them, and we wouldn't be able to write them. That will take a whole nother level of technology than we have today, even though what we're doing now is really, really advanced. So I don't think we will be in the foreseeable future able to just cram new memories, new knowledge into the human brain.
Or skills,
even if we had neuroelectrical access to the basal ganglia or the whole of the brain. On a science fiction note, well, maybe at some point our brains will be like augmented in such a way that a lot of what the human brain is doing right now will be performed by this extra exocortex that is hardwired and looks like something out of Star Trek. But right now, and with the technology we have available and the knowledge we have available and the lack of knowledge, the knowledge gap that is there, no, I don't think we will be able to upload any skills or knowledge bases quickly. It's ass down, nose in book.
So then I think then what you just said about building on top, right? So like we have a soft core, so to speak, and then if we are able to augment it in ways that we can control things external to us. So whether that's some exoskeleton or a smaller augmented, piece of machinery. I think, some simple stuff is like, where people, you can just track the direction of like where you look, right? Just some EMG, no problem, or some visual tracking, no problem. And then you can use that as sort of a simple input command like scenario. And then you would be able to control things around you or outside of you. So that would be the augmentation in a very simplified manner of what you're talking about now. And then if we were to enhance that complexity even more and say that it's like the neocortex of the neocortex. So I don't know what we would call it. The layer on the epicortex. Oh, that's cool. That's a good name. The epicortex. Then, yeah, how would that even look? And is that the direction that you think, the Neuralink is trying to head towards? And because that's the one that gets the most media attention. I mean, they've been really, really good at driving media. And I think you and I both read recently an article about how sometimes they're super open about some of the progress that they make, and sometimes they are completely closed about the progress that's being made, which for a commercial sense, I can understand. But to drive scientific progress, which this company also relies upon heavily, it seems a bit short-sighted. So Neuralink, I mean, I know you've talked about it before.
Yeah. Whenever I get a call from a journalist or from somebody who wants a lecture or something like that, they always leave so Neuralink, what about those guys? I have never experienced someone calling me and said, so Synchron, what about those guys? Or Blackrock Neurotech, what about those guys? And it is because Neuralink is the most prolific public relations neurotech company out there, in my opinion. And it's a good thing. This is what Elon Musk does. Remember when the Tesla came out, people were like, oh, an electric car. This has never been conceptualized before, and this is the future. Well, except for in the 20s. I believe Ford made some kind of equivalent to the old Model T that was electrical. I'd have to look it up.
I think it wasn't Ford. It was his predecessor, right? So wasn't it? I thought it was.
Yeah, probably was. It was even earlier. I saw a post about it about a year ago, so I'm muddy on the details. But what Elon Musk is real good at doing is that he's taking an existing technology that he thinks is cool, and admittedly, it is cool. And then he makes it into a commercial success. And then he makes this whole public relations, this media presence about it, which drives the public attention towards this technology. And suddenly this technology that everybody forgot about because no one was interested, or because no one never did the hard work of telling people about it, then suddenly it becomes the talk of everyone. So what essentially I think is going to happen with Neuralink is going to do the same for brain-computer interface technologies that Tesla did for the electrical car. It goes from obscure nerd shit to cutting-edge, cool scientific breakthrough things that we all want to talk about. And I think that what Neuralink is essentially doing is that they are heralding the beginning of the BCI era. Because other companies, Synchron, they already have way more patients running around with their device in the head. Do you know the Synchron chip? Well, maybe some of the listeners don't know the Synchron chip.
But I've heard of Blackrock, but I haven't heard of Sync. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just start with Synchron. And Synchron is one of the closest competitors to Neuralink. They are spearheaded by Thomas Oxley, and what they want to achieve is they want to make this small. Oh, they already did it. They made this small stent throat. You know how a heart stent looks, right? It's this tiny mesh, and then you jam it into the artery that you need to expand, and then you blow it up, and it sits there and it holds the artery open. So the stent throat is basically a stent that it has electrodes in it. So what they want to do is they want to go in through the jugular, up around the cerebellum, and up into the venous sinus of the brain, and then place the stent throat at the very top of the brain, and then it sits there and communicates through the blood-brain barrier electrically with the motor cortexes of both sides of the brain. And this is a chip that is much safer to implant because you don't actually have to go into the brain. You can just hang out in the blood vessels and then implant a chip that can speak directly to the brain. So the Synchron chip is way ahead of the Neuralink chip, actually. They already have like 10 patients. They have been a bit on the slow side in starting these public calls for test participants. They did that in April or May. So it's like a month or two ago that they made their calls.
In 2024.
Yeah, in 2024. Yeah. Somebody might listen to this in 2028 and be like, whoa. Okay, so Synchron is one of the close competitors to Neuralink, and I believe they have a good product because it is easier and safer to implant, and what it will require is not a specialized neurochip surgeon. Basically, any cardiologist with experience in placing stents in the arteries of the heart would be very well equipped to place stents in the veins of the brain.
Okay, that's brilliant because, I mean, this is two examples of really long-term thinking, foresight. So you're taking existing technology that has been tested in like a huge population, variety of population, like the stents. So, and then you're applying that to another area of the body in the same manner, so to speak. And then you're also building on all of the existing skill sets and knowledge of the people that are able to actually make the implant. So that's two things, right? So it's really quite smart. Just, and it also shows that you don't know necessarily where some of the next big, I don't want to say breakthroughs, but the, larger, I wouldn't say it incremental either, like it's a big step. Where sometimes it comes from the less obvious fields of science and it just crosses over and makes a leap. Yeah, I think I would imagine that a lot of people are unaware of this, that it's come from the field of cardiovascular research.
Well, this chip, the Synchron chip, yeah.
Yeah. Is that the same for what is Blackrock doing then? Are they different?
Blackrock is, in my opinion, the OG tech company. Blackrock, their flagship product is the Utah array, which is basically a small square, 4.2 millimeters in each side, with 96 electrodes sticking down into the cortex.
So it's a more classic.
Yeah, it's a more classic chip, and they have, of course, different varieties of these with more or less electrodes for different purposes. But the OG Blackrock chip is just that. It's 100 needles with wires sticking out of them that goes into the brain, and it works.
When you say it works, what do you mean? Like, I mean, it doesn't. It can last long. That's one thing. Like, it's biocompatible, or like, what is the utility?
We know it can last long. Well, obviously, it's an older technology because the Blackrock, the Utah arrays, they came about in the 1990s and early 2000s, and this is also one of my selling points in my lectures, that this technology is not new. 20 years ago, we had human beings playing Pong by the power of their brains and their implanted chips. In 2004, a quadriplegic man named Matthew Nagel got an implant. He had lost all function of his arms and his legs after a high cervical medulla lesion, damage to his spinal cord, in 2001. And then he went about as a quadriplegic in a wheelchair for 3 years until he became aware of this study that some researchers wanted to do, where they wanted to implant a chip into the brain of a human. They had tried to do it in monkeys, and that went well. And this chip was the Blackrock array. So in 2004, they implanted a chip into his right motor cortex, because he was left-handed. So his right motor cortex, in the areas that controls the arm and the hand, that is the part of his brain that he had the most conscious control over. So they implanted these chips, and within a few weeks after he was training with the chip, and after he kind of got to know it, got to speak its language, he could use it to shoot off emails, control his television set, play Pong, which is something everybody in neurotech is apparently doing. I mean, every time they want to demonstrate that something is working, they have a monkey playing Pong or something like that. So Pong is apparently...
It's the first step, test one.
An important disciplinary skill to learn to use the equipment. So master the equipment and master the skills too. Yeah, exactly. So Matthew Nagel, he was playing Pong in 2004, 2005 with a brain implant. And a few months ago, the first Neuralink patient, Nolan Aalborg, he was reported to be able to play Pong and write emails. And this is huge for him. And it is huge for every quadriplegic, every ALS patient who sees this and regains a little bit of hope for the future. But technologically speaking, it's old news.
Okay, so we've established that actually a lot of technologies that we've had lingering around for many, many years take a while to actually emerge over into commercial applications. And when I say commercial, I mean like publicly available for individuals to buy, purchase, or request, right? So we're using media to hype up, again, existing technology, because of course one of the roles is to like re-educate society, instill new hope, show that things are possible. And so those are not necessarily bad things. It obviously needs to happen. This is what drives funding, drives creativity, maybe sparks new minds to join, other scientists, on this road. But what do you suppose then is like the real barrier? So is it just because people don't know, or we've had the technology for so long, why do we even have to go to such extents to like rebuild the hype? Why is Elon Musk even challenged to do that? So what do you suppose is the main reason?
I don't think Elon Musk is rebuilding the hype. I think he's actually the first of these entrepreneurs who have been really good at building a hype to begin with. I mean, 10 years ago, I was aware of brain-computer interfaces and the state of... I knew about Matthew Nagel 10 years ago. And just for a bit of context, 10 years ago, I was still a medical student. And I knew about this, and I had heard about it, and I had read an article about it online somewhere, and I thought, well, this is cool, and send it over to my neurotech interested buddies, and they would also say, well, this is cool. But it just never hit the mass media because it wasn't as interesting as who won this football match or whatever. So Elon Musk is not rebuilding the hype. I think the hype has never really been there to begin with. So what he is doing is he's building hype for this technology. And I think that the work Neuralink is putting into hyping this technology and making news outlets, media platforms and so forth aware that we are moving into the brain-computer interface era. This is what really drives the hype about the technology, and this is also why I'm getting calls constantly from journalists who want to know more about this, because they could have called me last year, but last year Neuralink weren't that far ahead. So suddenly, in the public eye and in the eye, namely in the eye of some of these foundations that fund our research, brain-computer interface is not nerd shit anymore. It's cool shit. And I think that will drive a lot of funding into brain-computer interface technology and research and clinical application, and it will drive a lot of public interest.
Okay, so let's say that in the next 5 years, we really pick up momentum because now we have some education and some people are getting excited. What then becomes the important narrative to start shaping? Is it going to be, because I know, like, if you look at genetically modified foods and other types of genetically modified pretty much anything, that had a moment where it was like there was a spike of funding, and then suddenly something happens, maybe an undesirable outcome, and then boom, it gets cut, right? And it slows right down because you have this mass fear entering the market, and then you have legislation. So can you foresee that this is a narrative that we should be addressing now? Like, what are the risks?
I think the narrative we need to build to make this, and I want brain-computer interfaces to become a commercial success, because if it's not a commercial success, it will not be cheap, and if it's not cheap, then my patients cannot afford it. So I'm not particularly interested in having a brain chip implanted just so I can write emails faster and be ever vigilant in responding to job inquiries or something like that. I don't want a brain-computer interface chip to do stuff for me, or to allow me to do stuff that I can already do with my thumbs. The narrative we want to build is that this is a technology that can have a huge impact, that can change the world for patients with spinal cord injury, ALS, and so forth. We also need to build a narrative that this is not as dangerous as it might seem, because you shouldn't be concerned. You shouldn't be more concerned about a brain-computer interface chip than you are about your cell phone, your mobile phone, when it comes to data security and to hacking and everything, because no, people are not going to read your thoughts. In order for me to, and I will get back to the narrative, in order for me to, or in order for Nolan Aalborg to send a command to his brain-computer interface chip, he had to train for several weeks just to get the chip to understand that when he is thinking about moving his hand to the right, the cursor on the screen should go to the right, and vice versa. So it takes several weeks for the chip to just understand your simplest motor commands that are coming from the motor cortex where the chip is residing. So I don't see any conceivable way a brain-computer interface chip can look into the patterns of motor imagery of me imagining trying to move one of my hands, and then suddenly realize and then suddenly extract information about, I don't know, childhood memories or name of my first pet and so forth.
Your passwords.
Yeah, my passwords. So yeah, the narrative. What we need to deal with is in the narrative is the technophobia, and journalists always come back to this to me at the end of the interview, and they say, "Well, how concerned should we be? Not should we be concerned, but how concerned should we be?" And of course, we should always be concerned whenever a new technology makes its way. But I think social media is way more dangerous than any neural chip could ever be, than any brain surgery could ever be.
That's such a good comparison. It has already morphed our brains in ways that we can't imagine.
Yeah, I have a hot take that is maybe not scientifically very sound, and I admit this, but it's a good narrative. Are you familiar with the case of Phineas Gage?
Nope.
Phineas Gage was a rail worker in, I believe,
Oh, yes,
1862.
yes.
Yeah. I know that look. So he was working as foreman in a crew that had to that had to blast away the rock for the rails to go through the mountain. And the way you do this is you drill a hole into the rock with a large old-timey drill, and then you take out the drill, then you put gunpowder, dynamite, explosives into the hole, and then you stomp the hole with a big 5-kilo iron bar. And some of these rocks are made of flint, and flint and iron gives
a nice explosion. Yeah.
And sparks and explosives gives a nice explosion. So what happened was that Phineas Gage, he was stomping the explosive with this iron bar, accidentally set off an explosion, and then the iron bar torpedoed out of the hole and landed 25 meters behind him. It would have landed a lot longer, a lot further away, if something had not been in the way. And you do know what was in the way for the iron bar, right?
Yeah, his foot.
No, his brain.
It was. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm confusing him with another storyline. Yes. Okay.
Okay, I'd like to hear that one.
I was going with the pain one, where belief is much
because
more
you're a pain researcher and
yeah.
Of course. No. I want to hear that.
I've seen the pictures in the anatomy textbooks.
Yeah. So what essentially happened is that Phineas Gage, he got this 3, 4, 5 kilo iron rod torpedoed through his left eye, through his frontal lobes, out through the skull, and then it landed 25 meters behind him. He did not immediately lose consciousness. He did fall on his feet and started convulsing, and when he came to, they brought him to the company doctor. And the company doctor, he describes later that, well, when that Phineas Gage, he walked up to him and said, "I have some business for you, Doc." And then
he kept his sense of humor. That's
his sense of humor, yeah. And the doctor actually describes that at some point Phineas, he would vomit in the corner of the doctor's office because he had this huge buildup of pressure in the brain, and that gives you nausea and vomiting and so forth. We see this with head trauma patients all the time. But as he did so, the pressure from his thorax, it planted up through his head and actually caused a small part of his brain to dislodge and fall on the floor. And this is the point where the doctor, he's okay, this is actually serious. But Phineas Gage, he survived. He lived for another 12 years. And what essentially happened was that he changed. And in some textbooks, you will see that he became evil and rude and start beating his wife and all these stuff. And this is hugely exaggerated. We have no historical evidence to attest to that. But what did happen was that he lost his ability to perform his job as a foreman, who would need to be prepared and to know where all his guys are and to do all these executive functioning that the frontal lobe is accustomed to. He would have worse impulse control. He would be unable to keep his attention focused on anything for more than 5 seconds if it didn't bring him immediate satisfaction. And you see where I'm going with this. So it might be a hugely unscientific connection to make, but what we are essentially, and we know from sound research that it's a parallel, and it's a good parallel, because what we are essentially seeing in heavy users of TikTok and online reels and social media and so forth, they are systematically on a daily basis, several hours a day, training their brains to behave like somebody jammed a 3, 4, 5 kilo iron rod through the frontal lobes. Social media is equivalent to slow brain damage. And that is my hot take.
Yeah. And so you believe that, so now we have sort of the split narrative. So now we have like BCI, brain-computer interfaces coming forward. The fear and any concerns around that are probably so low in comparison to the devices that we carry around in our pockets all day or have on our desk, the ones that we give to our kids. So this is the narrative. So the narrative is, okay, BCI is not as dangerous as as TikTok. So
no, it isn't. But something always happens when something always happens whenever we start talking about putting things inside the brain.
Yeah, or just in the body. Like, yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, the brain, of course, feels a little bit more like you want to protect it. I mean, you have everything, all our movements are about protecting our brain, right? So if you fall, the only thing that your body is worried about protecting is making sure that your head doesn't hit the ground. So everything is about protecting the head. You see that with babies, actually, the way that they wobble, like everything is about making sure that the head stays upright. So yeah, it's really, really interesting phenomenon. I'm sure you'll start to see it in your baby girl soon. What do you wish people would ask you about then when it comes to BCI? Because you're getting a lot of questions about, should we be scared? Should we be concerned? What's the status? Is Neuralink real? You said earlier that you wanted to have some technology that is affordable for patients. And one of the reasons why, thinking about how general products are brought to market, they usually need a market, right? So I'm just going to summarize my two questions for you. What questions would you wish people would ask you? And how are we going to get these products to market? What is the shift needed?
It's a bit of a double bind, the second question. The first question is easy. I wish people would ask, how cool is this? Because it is insanely cool. And then I get to talk about all the stuff that brings hope rather than despair. So that is the answer to the first question. And as for your next question, that is a bit of a Gordic knot, because I don't think we should create a market for faster access to cat videos on the internet by people having stuff implanted in their brain. As of 2024, I see invasive brain-computer interface as a huge potential for patients with neurological disorders. And I've earlier stated that I don't want a chip right now, but if I was in a car accident, if I were to be in a car accident tomorrow and become a tetraplegic, then I hope that I have a chip by the end of the week. It would be nice, probably wouldn't happen, but then I would have one installed as soon as possible.
And that would be the best time, right? A lot of people don't understand, like, the sooner the better, because there's so much reorganization that happens in the brain, and also in the spinal cord after severe injury. And if it's too severe, then you could have a lot of other unwanted consequences aside from, loss of movement and control, like pain, for example, is one. But yeah, I just wanted to put that in there, that some people don't realize that it's like, you don't want a chip 3 years later.
Yeah, you can get it 3 years later. That was one of the main selling points when they did the Matthew chip, that nobody at that time knew if his brain had reorganized so much that he had lost conscious control over those parts of his cortex. But yeah, I would like for my future patients to have a chip as soon as possible, but it's still a Gordic knot, because I can't really, as a doctor and as a neurotechnologist, go out and say, well, yeah, everybody should go have unnecessary brain surgery to be able to connect even faster with social media. I don't see how there would be. Well, I see that there would be a market for it, and people would probably buy it, but I would advise against it. I think this is a huge technology for the people who really need it, but I think a lot of people would be better off without a brain chip and without their smartphones. So I'm in a bit of a bind here, because at one point I'm this neurotech enthusiast, and at the other point I just want to go live in the woods in a cabin with no technology at all, because I think that is what is important about brain health. And I know I'm circling around the issue, how can we create a market about this? I think that market will emerge at some point. At one point in the history of the cell phone, somebody said, well, why would we need a cell phone? Why would we need text messages? No one is ever going to use that. So maybe in 10 years' time, everybody who doesn't have a brain-computer interface chip will maybe be seen as some kind of old-fashioned Luddite. I don't know.
So your research, like you have run some of your own studies. Obviously, you're doing your PhD. What has been some of the challenges that you face? Because we're talking about now, one challenge we know already exists is like the market has to be big enough in order for the progress to go faster, right? The people need to feel like this is something that they can fund. But you're working with, government funds, your PhD, for example, that's through some organization and some grants. Where did you recently receive some funding? Is that not right?
Yeah, I did. I had some funding from here and there, some money from the department and some money from the university, a private foundation, Grosser LF Foghs Fund. They gave me money for electrodes. I got a pretty substantial. I got a substantial amount of money from the Danish Yasha Foundation, who are also interested in neurological diseases. But the huge leap in my research, and my main sponsor is actually North Jutlandic Foundation. And for those of you who are not familiar with Danish geography, the main part of Denmark is called Jutland. North Jutland is, well, the northernmost part, and we are very proud about being North Jutlandics. So this North Jutlandic Foundation, they said, it's called Mielsen Foundation, the Mielsen Foundation. They said that, well, we want to make a difference, and we want to make a difference for people in Northern Jutland. So they went ahead with a huge pile of money for our research center, the Center for Neurotechnology and Rehabilitation. They gave us first 15 million Danish kroner, and then up that with another 5 million to establish a real neurotechnological research center in Northern Jutland, and that was huge. And 1 million of those money, they dripped into my project, the BCI Star project, thus allowing me to actually complete it and do something for these patients. But that was luck, basically. I have a good project and we are doing great research up here, but if the Mielsen Foundation hadn't been there to give us a huge pile of money, I would still be scrambling for bits and dimes at all the smaller foundations, because even if brain-computer interface, it sounds cool, it has a science fiction-y vibe, and every time I tell people what I do, usually I just say I work in rehabilitation and leave it at that, because, well, but even if people are impressed with the science fiction vibe of brain-computer interfaces, there are all these cancer patients and all these acute stroke patients and all these lung patients and all these diabetics, and there's a lot of people who are there's just more of them. There are 12,000 new stroke patients in Denmark each year, and I think you can multiply that number by 10, 20 and get the number of new diabetics per year. So the commercialization of a product always follows the money, and the money follows the demand. So when looking at brain-computer interface chips for people with spinal cord injury, like one of the articles you sent me, I had read it before actually. Well, there's just not so much cash. So when I do something that is cutting edge for a small group of people, there's not so much interest from the foundations. So if I'm not lucky, as I have been, then I have to spend a lot of time just scrambling for funding. And that means that it's hard to establish these great multi-center studies. And when I look at the literature, which I'm very much doing right now, because I'm writing on my dissertation, I can see that the very largest of these brain-computer interface for upper limb rehabilitation following a stroke, these studies are with an N of 50, 60, 70 for the largest studies, but most of them are actually case studies.
Yeah, and N is like the number of participants in a study, right? So this was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because one thing is funding, and even if you had extra funding, a lot of the research in BCI, to my understanding, is that it's done on smaller cohorts. So it's only like a few cases, and you're saying like a big study. Now you're quoting me as like 50. For cancer projects or a diabetes project, you'd be looking at 1,000. And then
exactly.
So what is the issue?
Well, one of the issues is that it's not easy to find 1,000 stroke patients. And I just said that we have 12,000 new cases, but it's not easy for me to find 1,000 stroke cases in northern Jutland at the rehabilitation center with just the right amount of upper limb weakness and just the right residual cognitive abilities and so forth. So even I screened more than 1,000 patients for my BCI Star project, and at the end of the day, only 55 were eligible for our treatment. And even then, of these 55, some have acute ischemic infection. They have a clot in their brain, depriving the brain of blood, and others have a bleeding in the brain, a hemorrhage that destroys some of the brain tissue. And stroke doctors, they always ask me the same question. Well, how can you just group these patients into the same group? Because it's widely different what is going on in the brains. And I'm like, well, I have to. If I want to make research, I have to. So what I think we would need in brain-computer interface mediated rehabilitation research is a multi-center study. So we can say, okay, I can call up Germany and say, okay, how many premotor cortex hemorrhage patients between ages 50 and 70 do you guys have? Because I have 2, and if I call France and if I call Argentina and so forth, then maybe we can scramble enough patients to actually say something about this type of patient. But the problem is that we cannot do this without insane amounts of funding, and we can't get insane amounts of funding without solid results, and we can't get solid results without insane amounts of funding. But ultimately, what is nice about being a BCI researcher these days is that the public interest is growing, and is growing fast. And that has made it easier for me to secure funding from these smaller foundations.
Okay, so one of the things then you see as like a solution-oriented approach to moving forward would be, of course, let's just imagine if we have enough funding to run, like, say, one of these first multinational study or multi-center studies, which most likely will be a multinational study, then the reason that is needed is because when you have an injury, a brain injury, regardless of how it happens, right? It's so diverse, right? And then you need a homogeneous sample in order to run a study, in order to test a very specific question to see if you get the same output under the same conditions. And one of the challenges that you've highlighted here is that not only do you have a small number of persons to work with, when you look at those individuals, they're hugely different. So it's like every individual is its own experiment in some way. And so because of that, the conclusions and the steps that you can take when you're both analyzing and drawing interpretations from your data, you have to be really careful, I guess, in some way of what you can claim. And because of that, and you must not, I'm sure you're not the only like BCI researcher that struggles with this question. So I guess one of the solutions is to try to find new ways to coordinate more. And what is your impression of the scientific community for actually going down that path?
I think people in this field, in my experience, are jovial, friendly, interested in collaboration. There's not a lot of this competitive atmosphere. I have worked a lot with the nice people from Gtech, which is an Austrian neurotech company, and they make products like EEG caps and amplifiers, and they also have a product suite for actually doing what I'm trying to accomplish. It's called Recoverix. Quick statement of interests and everything. I have never received anything from Gage, but they did invite me to do a workshop together with one of the salespeople in Copenhagen, for which I received compensation per hour from the conference, not from Gtech. So if they have never paid me anything, but they are nice guys, and they know that I'm working with something that could be a direct competitor to what they're doing, their recovery system. But still, they invite me to do talks, and they shoot me a message every now and then. Hey, how's it going, and so forth. So even if even if they could see me as a potential competitor, they are still nice guys, and we're doing all sorts of knowledge exchange and collaboration, and they invited me to come down and visit them at some point, which I haven't gotten around to. So even within the competition, people are still friendly and jovial, and they want to collaborate. So I think it's a very nice community to work with.
Okay, that's really encouraging to hear, and I guess maybe one of the reasons why it could be so nice and friendly, at least at this point, is because it's just the beginning, and you recognize that you need each other actually to move the field forward.
I have found it hard to convince foundations and convince people about the feasibility of this, because a lot of the studies that we are looking at are actually non-significant. But when you pool all this, there is a significant effect of the intervention.
You mean statistically non-significant?
Statistically non-significant. Yes. Yeah. And what essentially happens is that if you go to any of these researchers who published something non-significant and says, "How was your last study? Did you find anything?" They would be forced to say, well, it was statistically non-significant, and then people will conclude, then it doesn't work.
But that's because of the sample size, which we also talked about.
Yeah, exactly. It's because of the sample size. So you end up in a situation where you can't afford to make large studies because you can't get funding, and you can't get funding because you didn't do the large studies.
There's a catch-22, right? So and I think maybe that's where there needs to be some exceptions to the rules around like what is considered a scientific publication, what is considered a scientific finding, what is considered incremental work. And, are there other like parts that you can publish around a BCI like project that you could? So I'm not saying that you like manipulate anything, of course. That's not at all what I'm getting at. But are there other metrics that you could get more data and report? Like, is there like the psychophysical metrics, the behavioral metrics, because there might be other numbers that you can have in a study to show that it was a success. So maybe are there other proxy measures of success that BCI projects are not taking advantage of to help the narrative, at least the scientific one?
Well, the problem in rehabilitation research is that it's not enough to just show that there is a neurophysiological change, because I have shown that. I have very significant results on one of the neurophysiological parameters. And as after the very first session. So there's no doubt about this. This makes a change, and I have significant results in the intervention group, but in the control group, nothing happens. So it works. Something is happening. But the problem is that I can't go to a patient and say, well, Mr. Johnson, your amplitude is now 20% greater. Are you not satisfied? And Mr. Johnson will say something like, well, I still can't button my shirt, and I still can't go to the toilet unassisted. So what good does it do the patient? So the only real metric in my mind, or maybe the only two real metrics, is in rehabilitation training, rehabilitation research should be functional ability and quality of life. And if I can't do anything significant about those, a lot of the people looking at the project will say, well, it didn't work. You didn't find anything. And then it will be hard for me to secure the funding for the next 60 patients, which would theoretically bring the amount of the amount of participants to a level where I would see a significant difference, simply because the first 60 didn't do it. So, and I think this is the same for all niche research, that if you pool the data from and perform a meta-analysis, you can see that there is a difference. But if you go to the foundation and they will say, well, we need to see something that works right here, right now. And then we are back at the dopamine question.
Right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so the foundations also have a dopamine problem. That's interesting.
But the reason why I'm circling back towards the whole dopamine question, or what I call the case against dopamine, the reason I'm circling back to this is that I believe that this way of thinking, that we need results here and now, we need something that either generates revenue or quality of life from day one, we need something to show for from day one, is what is permeating science, and it's permeating the way we interact with each other. We need results. I've never been on Tinder because I'm always in a relationship anyway. But I know people who are, and it's the whole swipe left, swipe right. Everything has to go faster. The television series I mentioned earlier, they have to go faster. More stuff needs to happen in less time. And as long as we let this quest for immediate effects and gratification permeate how we talk to each other and how we do research, we are at a standstill. And I know this has been a concern of many researchers, all this publish or perish, it's actually also a variation on this theme. But I've heard people say that many of the Nobel Prize winning achievements, they would never have been discovered today, because it was discovered by people researchers who just got a bunch of money from the university and say, well, do whatever you want. Go science.
Follow your intuition, follow your findings.
Exactly. And then they found penicillin, and then they found the sodium potassium pump, and then they found this economical theory that changed the way the stock markets work, and so forth. And all of these discoveries might not have been made today because you get a bag of money to solve this particular problem and generate revenue right here, right now, within the next 2 years. Why do you think we haven't gone to the moon for several decades?
Yeah, I mean, do you think that this is probably a widespread problem? Not only for you, not only for BCI, there's other areas of science that suffer. Do you see a solution forward? I mean, you said multinational studies. Do you think the funding options need to be better? Do you think the funding, like the demands for what we see as like a proper scientific finding, need to be changed and maybe modified for specific areas of research? Because in this case, statistics doesn't make sense for you guys, like having small sample sizes.
And there's a lot of other niche research areas that are in the exact same bind as we are, and well, they have the same problem. So it's not a unique BCI problem. I think it's the publish or perish culture, and we need immediate results that will either generate money or wow effect for us. Way of thinking, that is the problem. So it's not unique to BCI studies, but But I think that we can do a lot by doing public awareness about how science is done and how science is funded, because a lot of people are not aware how this is going on. Most people think that, well, most people in Denmark, and I have this conversation a lot of times actually, most people in Denmark believe that science is being carried out by insert hospital, university, government, whatever, and it is the money from the taxpayers that are paying for it. So every time somebody is doing research in something that is remotely niche, like I heard about this researcher once who in Aarhus who was doing a PhD on the word.
On the word
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, and it sounds stupid. And people were like, "Oh, my tax money is going into this, and I don't see how." Yeah, it's really intriguing, because what she was really doing was she was doing research into how does the brain process thoughts into words, and what happens when a person has a brain that is working faster than their mouth. This was what she was doing, but in the elevator pitch, she had. In some way, she had told some people that she was actually just doing a PhD on the word and everybody was, not everybody, but a lot of people in Denmark were like, so this is what my tax dollars are going to. This is stupid, and why can't they get a real job? And when I was their age, and so forth.
But this is what happens when science gets simplified, right?
Yeah, it happens when science gets simplified, but it also happens when people don't know who is funding this, because it wasn't funded by the university; it was funded by a private foundation. So the whole narrative about where are my tax dollars going, it's also flawed.
That's true. And at least the private foundation is putting the funds back into the economy. One could say it's circulating money, so that creates jobs. It creates, you have to spend money, right, to drive economies. So yeah, we could also just tag that on top. But I can understand sometimes why. Like for me, one of my pet peeves is like when people get a lot of money, and then like a lot of money, and like more money than you guys have got for your project, and the funds that come out, or the research that comes out, you just think, what is, it's not something that you would shout out from a rooftop. So I find myself now in a position where I sympathize with your case, but sometimes I do see that a lot of research fund is wasted on projects that really don't like move the field forward.
Yeah,
and then
projects.
It's like it just keeps repeating, like you expect a different result to happen, and it's like after you've given someone like over 100 million in research funding, you can make a lot of startup companies with that can also drive the economy and develop stuff. So if your research isn't like developing and pushing out useful knowledge after like that amount of money, then I feel like there should be some accountability. So I'm not talking about BCI where you have 1 or 2 studies and you're testing new tech. That's different. So it's sort of like, where does the line, when does it transition? Like at what point does the researcher need to be held accountable for their use of funds? I personally find the project interesting, especially when I understand the backstory of why the project has been funded. And you've also highlighted a case now where you have to simplify stuff so quick and make it so catchy because we're fighting against, like you said, the dopamine. What was your term? The dopamine.
The case against dopamine.
The case against dopamine.
Yeah, but it's also unfair to dopamine. But I'd like to circle up back to that at a later point. So yeah, we're fighting against the case. We're fighting against dopamine, and that is why I am making this civil case against dopamine.
Yeah, so that is, you think, one of the biggest threats for scientific progress then is these, hits of dopamine, because I also don't like to be someone's hit of dopamine. I feel like I want to be there for the long-term learning effects. The part of me that I was just thinking about this with your BCI project and others like it, how does dopamine fit into that? Like with the learning, you made a comment earlier about that it took like several weeks for after an implant for you to get any sort of meaningful action or meaningful utility. But we know now that the microprocessing and computational power they're accelerating rapidly. Is this just a question of computational power, or is it a question of like why does it take so long? And are we not, like, what's the learning process there? Why do you suppose is it the individual that needs to develop that symbiotic relationship, or is it the computational side of understanding, what is being recorded and making sense of what's being recorded?
Yeah, bit of both, most of the last. In order for the brain-computer interface chip, in this case, the Neuralink chip, to understand what is going on, it needs time to calibrate. And the way you do this is that one way to do it, I'm not exactly sure how Neuralink is doing it because they haven't published this, but one way to do it is to sit in front of the screen and have the screen give you some cues. So the screen will say, think about closing your right fist. And then the patient is thinking about closing their right fist. And then the system knows that, okay, so this particular electrical pattern running through my 1024 electrodes is associated to right fist clenching. Good. So we put that in the bank. Now we're making a truth table. We're making a truth table in a, 4-dimensional matrix, because you also need to have the time with 1024 times how many milliseconds you're doing this. So this huge box of data goes into the fist clenching truth table. Bump, put it there. And then you do it again. And now you get a box that looks like it, but it's kind of different because of all these time variations, and maybe he got distracted, and maybe some neurons are just taking a break or something like that. And then you do it again, and you do it again and again and again. And gradually, the system uses machine learning algorithm to extract how would I expect a fist clenching electrical activation to look like. And then whenever the patient uses the system, it has generated a whole library of these expectations. So this I would expect to be fist opening. This is hand turning. This is hand moving to the right, to the left, whatever. And whenever the system sees some form of electrical activity after the calibration phase, it will compare it to its library of inferred activation patterns. And then it will generate an assumption based on these patterns to say, I think that what you're trying to imagine right now is this. And then it will transfer that to the computer. So it is a system that needs to learn to understand the neural processes and the electrical activation patterns going on in the brain whenever the patient is performing motor imagery. And that just takes time.
I'm just thinking that if we could make progress, if we could show progress on how fast it takes someone to train on something, then you sort of start to get closer to establishing what is the process of this symbiotic relationship that would need to be established for BCI to properly integrate and to become more useful. And I guess this is just about just any other research project. Like, the more data points you have, the more informed you get. But then you also run into other areas of science where, too much information is also not very useful. We know that from a lot of sports science research, that typically as you get into expert levels, like, you end up taking only 2 or 3 pieces of information and ignoring the rest. Whereas when you're naive or younger, inexperienced player, you focus on everything. So it's about, what are the critical pieces of information that we really need in order to make this work? And I was quite interested in to see where we were with with the reward mechanisms as it relates to BCI. So I think it might be easier with exoskeletons, where you're not actually taking information from the brain per se, but I'm just thinking out loud now. Maybe I should be saying because my mouth is moving faster than my brain.
No, the other way around.
Is it the other way around? Okay.
Yeah, it's the other way around. And I actually have this, I'm very self-conscious whenever I hear myself on a recording, because I do the a lot.
Oh, me too. And like.
I believe that it's because the rest of my brain, apart from my Broca's area, that is the speech-producing area of the brain, the rest of my brain is simply just a lot quicker than that part of the brain. So I don't know if I'm slow with words or if I'm just, I don't know.
Well, one piece of advice that I got when I was, I like to do a lot of presentations. Something I very much enjoyed was scientific communication, but also teaching others how to get their ideas out more clearly. And one of the pieces of advice that I came across, which I think you and I have discussed prior, is that everybody sounds like a poet in their head. And unless, like in preparation for a presentation, unless you say it out loud, you actually don't really know where your knowledge gaps are or where you have a flaw in your presentation. I have done it as a student in very, very early in my academic career, because I transitioned to a different presentation style also early in my academic career, that we tend to like go through our slides or we go through our presentation in our heads. We always cycle through like, I'm going to say this on this slide, then I'm going to go here, I'm going to say this on this slide. And so we have these thoughts that go really, really fast in our head. But unless you articulate them and say them out loud, you really don't know how it's going to truly sound when you present, which is why just presenting out loud once to yourself, I would say, is 100% improvement in any presentation that someone would deliver. And I've seen it. I've trained people. I've seen it. You've seen it too in the course we've had together. It makes a huge difference. So I 100% agree that the ideas that float around in our head move so much faster than our ability to articulate them into words. And maybe maybe that would be a cool thing about BCI, was because at some point maybe BCI would be able to capture that rapid thinking and communicate it in a way.
That is what Mr. Musk is proposing.
Yeah. That we would be unlocked, right? That we would unlock.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think he has been quoted about saying this, that artificial intelligence is the greatest threat against humanity since the nuclear bomb, and so forth. And what he initially founded Neuralink on was that he wanted to create an ability for the human mind to communicate directly with an artificial intelligence, because he feared that if the artificial intelligence had to wait for our slow-moving mouths to articulate what we were thinking, it would say, well, I ain't got time for this, and then leave us standing at the station like a couple of grandparents at a New Year's Eve party or something like that. So what he wants to do with Neuralink is to make the human artificial intelligence instantaneous communication. That is his long-term goal. So what they're doing right now with helping the paraplegics and so forth, this is just a stepping stone for him. Or that's what he says anyway. Maybe it's just a publicity stunt. Nobody knows.
But then we come back to the reading the thoughts, right? So that is the ultimate goal, right, of BCI. Like in its extreme. I'm not saying it's the only one, and there's a lot of great smaller steps along the way. And when I say small, I don't mean that like trivial small. I just meant like in terms of where the goal is and where we are now. There's a lot of small steps to be made. So we really do want to develop something ultimately that could read our minds. What do you suppose would happen if you could read my mind and I could read your mind, and then you could read the mind of your neighbor or whatever? I mean, you said you watched Star Trek, right? Isn't that where the Borgs are from in Star Trek?
I haven't reached
Aren't
the
they
Borgs
all
yet.
connected?
Yeah. Borg
Okay.
is a Star Trek thing. Yeah, and they're all connected. Do not resist.
They're all connected.
I
What do you suppose would happen
if we? I think that we would run into a lot of awkward silences.
Well, we wouldn't need to speak, so that's kind of intended, right? I'm just teasing with you.
I mean, it would be incredibly awkward if.
Why would we even need to talk?
Yeah, but if every time I had a thought, if I met somebody and they asked me for a direction, and I was thinking, man, that's an
I know how to
ugly
use a
shirt.
map.
Yeah. And well, probably nobody would ask for direction when they are uplinked with Google Maps and so forth. But if every positive and negative and random thought that occurred to me was widely available to everybody, I think I would generate a lot of chaos, actually, because my mind is very chaotic, and I don't think that would be a good thing.
I think it would be noisy, right? Well, we talked about social media. If you think about social media and how much information is stored there, because when we think about something reading our minds, that whatever reads our mind would also need the ability to process that information.
Yeah, also, yes.
Talk
about a huge environmental load right there with the processing power and the power used to generate that.
Yeah, now we're back to Keanu Reeves in The Matrix. So it would be like downloading Kung Fu in like half a millisecond. So maybe when you think about, we can read, something else can read our minds, but whether or not we would then have the ability to read others, that would be pretty heavy.
I don't think I would like that, but
I don't think I would either.
In a recent interview by Mr. Nolan Aalborg, when he was on the Joe Rogan Experience a few weeks back, the interview, it started very soundly with discussions about BCI and how the process was and so forth, and then at some point they address the question about what would happen if we could all read each other's minds. And they end up concluding that it would abolish all conflict, that humans would finally reach a state where we would have no need for war, and we would have no need for conflict, and we would all blissfully join hands in our telepathic communion. And I don't see that happening.
I'm not sure I can get 100% on board with that, because it doesn't remove the disparities that exist between geography, haves and have-nots. And, we are a natural hierarchy being. I mean, if you only have to look at nature for evidence of that, and to say that we are different or that we are not part of that process or that ecosystem is just maybe a bit naive. Of course, I hate saying anything that someone can then say, oh, well, you were wrong. I don't really care. Actually, I work with the information that I have now and that is available to me and make decisions on that. But I don't think we can remove ourselves from nature in that sense. Like we have
no. We would still be
hierarchy.
Hierarchical. Yeah, exactly. And there would be the haves and the haves not, and there would be those that believe in this one set of moral imperatives, and somebody would believe in something else, and somebody have this god and somebody have this god, and traditionally humans fight over belief and resources mainly, and there would still be variation in the beliefs and the resources among humans, so of course we would still have conflict.
Absolutely. And then, as we have just discussed here, I mean, the ability to actually engage with that type of collective intelligence would require that our brains are very different than how they are now. Like, how would you, even if you didn't interface directly with the entirety of collective intelligence, you would technically have to simplify. The questions, the answers to your questions would be synthesized and simplified. and we can't even simplify properly the project. So how like we're back into oversimplification of very complex things. So I think I'll be on your side of this argument, that I don't think that we would actually reach peace. I think a lot of secrets would be exposed and people would get really upset, and it doesn't resolve the disparity. Yeah, I was going to say, one could also argue that if we ever got to that level of tech, that level of scientific progress, maybe our culture and society would have changed quite a lot, because I mean, to get to that level of technology would require a lot of change as well.
Yeah,
we're still struggling to get the electric car as a, or nuclear power, or...
Yeah, exactly. So the question is not what would happen if we could read each other's thoughts. The question is what needs to happen for us to be able to read each other's thoughts.
Yeah, very, very nicely put. Yeah, what do we need to change now? And I think that's a really, really massive question, because essentially it's like, how do you get world peace? That's the question, right? So, how do you progress?
Yeah, but right now with the state of research funding and so forth, it's not a question of how do we reach scientific progress, but do we want to? Because we can always spend our time generating more revenue for our shareholders, and that is also in the way of progress.
But do you think the progress is needed because when you really sit back and think about it, we're sitting on a world that has limited resources, and do you think scientific progress is needed in order to sustain human life beyond, like, this is going back to I feel like Elon Musk owns too many narratives. Like, now we're going into SpaceX, right? So it's like, do we recognize that scientific progress is necessary because we do not have enough resources available to us today, or are we just so ill-equipped to manage our resources that we're wasting them unnecessarily?
I think if we could revert the world to the 1990s in terms of our consumption habits, and then add to that all the good things that are happening in equality and freedom of speech and civil rights and equal opportunities for persons of all genders and so forth. If we could take all the progress that has been made in acceptance and civil rights and so forth, and put them into the 90s where we all had 68K modems, I think that would be the best of all worlds. Honestly, we don't. And I'm circling back to social media. We don't need social media to be happy. People have been happy before Facebook. This is a hot take, I know, but people have been happy without technologies. At some point, people were reading books, and that was nice, and people liked it. We were happy before podcasts. We were happy before audiobooks, and we were happy before generative AI. So I think that in order for us to create human happiness and human quality of life, we don't need all these technological advancements, and we don't need new clothes every 3 months, which has been going on for a long time, which is a huge load on the environment anyway. We have too much stuff. So if we could, as a species, channel our efforts into things that would generate more happiness on the long term and not just more dopamine, yeah, that would be great.
But do you think we are able, like, I mean, you're a neurologist.
At some point I will be,
yes. Is our brain able to make those adjustments? People don't invest because...
That's why it's hard. Because our brains are hardwired to do two things, and two things only. It is hardwired to keep us alive, and it is hardwired to keep us procreating.
Agree.
And everything else is just permutations on these themes. So I might want to, I don't know, write a book, but if it doesn't keep me procreating or surviving, my brain will look at it and say, well, that's secondary. Don't spend time doing that. You should spend time, however, hunting for likes, because that will keep you procreating, sir. And this is why it's so hard to accomplish anything if there's no immediate reward, and that is why we admire the bodybuilders and the musicians and the multilingualists and everybody who accomplishes something that takes effort. Because effort is hard.
I think actually a lot of people know this. There's enough. I think even though we have social media driving certain perceptions of what people think will make them happy, and we can challenge many of them, I do believe that a lot of people know that eating sugar is not good for them. I do believe that a lot of people know that they should move more because it will have a cascade of effects that are both good for like your physical health, but also your mental health. So we know these things. We know that we shouldn't smoke, and if we drink alcohol, it should be limited. We know, but yet we don't. And what is it that you think that what is the magic solution? Like, what is it that we have to tell ourselves? What is the next like conscientious mental leap that we need in order to do this? Because if you look at people and say, what really drives you to, focus so much on an individual goal, it's like they have to override the natural reflex to, eat sugar or, watch the telly or watch, scroll on social media. They have to override these other reflexes.
I wish there was a magic fix, but there isn't, and that is one. No, but I have a fix.
What is your fix? Like your personal?
Have you ever heard the speech by, I believe his name was Admiral William McRaven, about making your bed?
I don't believe so, and if I have, I can't remember.
So my fix is I make my bed every morning.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah. So essentially, the takeaway from this is that you need to practice every day to do something that gives you no immediate benefit. And if you get out of bed and you make your bed as the first thing each morning, then you have accomplished something within the first 5 minutes of being awake, rather than roll onto your side and then open social media. I know I'm getting at this, but rather than starting your day with mindless scrolling, you start your day by accomplishing something. And I think that I would add to my repertoire of fixes is to master one skill.
Yes,
which I have learned today. Yeah, because it's really good. Because what we need for the coming generations, and what I need to teach my daughter, is that you need to develop the skill that says, I can put off the dopamine craving and I can do something that has a long-lasting benefit to me, like making my bed, learning an instrument, learning a language. I mean, of course, it's more interesting for me to eat sugar and watch cartoons than to sit down with a German book and trying to learn German, which is what I'm doing right now. It's easy. There will always be an easy thing to do, and then there will be a right thing to do, basically. So it boils down to that there is a dopamine way and there is the frontal lobe way. And you need to practice going the frontal lobe way every day, and there is no easy fix. But making your bed and mastering one skill is a good way to start.
All right, Benjamin, I really want to say thank you so much for joining me today, and working with us at NobleBlocks and being on the Bonded by Science podcast. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, and most importantly, some of your best tips, your best hacks for moving forward. And I hope that I will see you again, and we can talk again on another episode at a later time.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.